that have made it to the grand final. We'll be introducing them a bit later, but for now, we will be introducing the motion. Yeah. Oh, so it's not going to be short. So I wanted to give a short comment before we read out the motion. So this is important. I think it's extremely important. Many times, when we set motions about our lovely continent, Africa, we set motions about invasions, like they did in WUDC, poverty, disease, and many other horrible things that happen. Yet there's a lot of positive material and positive principles that you can be able to get from the social structures that exist in the continent. Hopefully we can begin to look at these things more positively with more diligence with regards to how we frame, characterize, and debate motions about the African continent. Hopefully today we can begin a trend of a more positive outlook of that lovely continent. Not everything is about war, disease, invasions, and poverty, guys. We must do better. Now, for the info slide. It reads, Ubuntu, I am because we are, is a philosophical belief that asserts that people's identities should be shaped by, and their obligations should primarily be owed to, their communities. I repeat, Ubuntu, I am because we are, is a philosophical belief that asserts that people's identities should be shaped by, and their obligations should primarily be owed to, their communities. That is the info slide. Now for the motion.
If you want to take bets on what the motion is between your friends, I can give you 5 seconds. Yeah. Something finance? This house prefers a world where all individuals have a strong belief in Ubuntu.
Alright everyone, it seems like the prep time is over, so we will be ready to introduce our teams. So just wait a minute. Alright, we have OG. We have music for OG ready.
I have a spoiler. David Africa is not OG.
Alright, I see our OG. So, music. Third time the charm this year, following the steps of Croatia and Serbian teams joining their first WDC Open final. Sofia! Maybe the big stage will bring them luck to keep WDC title for the Asia. Ateneo! One of them once spoke on a big stage in Thailand. Both of them win one title this year and probably would like to win another one. In closing government, Tel Aviv, for one of them, it's the second WBC final, but for both of them, it will be debuted on the live stage. In the closing opposition, Princeton B.
Alright, good evening everyone. I am Ashish. I will be the chair for this final. I have with me a fantastic panel comprising Anna Schrader, Jack Stanley, Joel Lewis, Pranav Kalgalka, Ruth Akalaste, Ruth Silkoff, Simon Law, and Takahashi Tota. Without any further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to address the House and to speak for the motion which will bear his government's name. Yeah.
Is this working? I'll take you away from opening opposition. And you only appear, you're not yelling. Okay. Before I begin, thank you to everyone in the Balkans who supported us. Thank you for everyone outside the Balkans who also supported us. It's been quite a journey, and I hope this is short to you. Okay. Timer. So. Give me a second. Starting in 3, 2, 1. In opening government, we believe that no man is an island, and to the extent to which you yourself can do anything in the world, collectively together, we can achieve greater things in society, build more things together, grow the economy, achieve political accountability, and impact these particular things. On their side of the house, we will necessarily be pushed into individualism and have the problem of collective actionism. I've never been hard to propose this particular motion. What I will prove to you is necessary on their side of the house, you'll be pushed to individualism for a couple of structural reasons. First, notice you have biological pushes to do these particular things. These are usually things like survival mechanisms. They want you to care about yourself because this is what we were a couple of thousand years old to do something. So this is why necessarily you experience things like pain and these type of things which pushes you to care about yourself. But second, other structures also prop up on their side of the house, like for example capitalism that pushes you individual narratives, like for example American dream, but also other narratives. For example, you should look into yourself and care about these particular things. But I don't know, even if they have some extent of collectivism, this collectivism is usually limited to other things, like for example your family or your close surroundings in these particular things, which actually take away from your community in this particular case, because when you're making family, this is what happens. And I know what they're going to say here. They're going to say, oh, what if you're LGBTQ person who was born in bad quality? you can still opt out on our side of the house, and this is extremely crucial nuance. Because this narrative, like any other narrative, is not brainwashing you completely into doing this sort of thing. If you experience pain, if you experience all these particular things, you can still opt out. We think that this still increases means that most of our benefits marginally increase, but these types of cards do not happen. But what is the bottom line here? This analysis also works on our side of the house. Because these pushes do not change on our side of the house, or still exist to a certain extent, which means that this narrative is not likely to be super bad coercive narrative in this particular case, and it's more likely to be a good one to do this sort of thing. Now, why everyone? And this is something very important. On both sides of the house, you have communities, but the extent to which resources are pulled from these communities, in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of people working together, and the extent to which you particularly care and invest in these communities changes. What happens on their side of the house? On their side of the house, you have collective action problem, because you have uncertainty as to what types of people engage in this community, and what types of people engage in this sort of thing. But you also have other reasons that are cooperating into this thing that make people necessarily not care. Like, for example, you happen to migrate to other country or other town because you want to pursue education in this particular case. Or you may have other interests because, how you say, you're a Zoomer in this particular case, and then you have grown other interests from your family. Here's the problem. The problem is that structurally, some people will always be locked into these communities. This, for example, old people, who don't have luck to be old in this particular case, they have to live in the neighborhood. This, for example, people who do not have access to education, who do not have access to all these particular things, who have to remain working as a barman or waiter in these particular things. So this means that if we're able to push other people who live to still care about this sort of thing, to still care about these sort of people, this is net benefit in this sort of case. Why, how do you say, what are the things that they're likely to do? Firstly, they're likely to do things like, for example, be more likely to return to their community, start a business, care, fix some kind of problems that exist in this particular case, or send money in this particular case, donate, for example, to a school to be built in this sort of case, or just, call your grandma and see how she is in this sort of case in order to be good, in order to create positive impacts to them. Now, this is extremely important because the narrative necessarily pushes you. I'll explain to you a bit more why this pushes you, but just to be clear, to the extent to which we at least a little bit limit the utility of these people, but we help people who have no other option and have to rely on their community in this particular case, we drastically increase the utility of these sorts of people. But notice also, secondly, you're also to engage not only people external but also internal in this particular case. Why? Two reasons. First, the narrative or the belief rewards people who are likely to be opting into this particular case. This is everything from, for example, your neighbor telling you, we did a good job building this fence the other day, or us going to church together collectively in doing this particular case, but also setting up examples of people who, do good things, John did this, etc. Now, this may not be perfect opt-out, but the fact that people virtue signal, the fact that people do this in a good particular way, means that you collectively have engagement and incentive to be pushed in the sort. But secondly, narrative also penalizes people who don't do in this particular case, who are most likely to be showcased as bad in this sort of case, or not doing their duties for this particular case. No, since this community is likely to be very important to you, and you're likely to be indoctrinated from this sort of thing. So your parents telling you this, your community telling you this particular case, you're likely to care. Again, not to the extent which you're receiving total harm, you can still opt out. But in the aggregate, people care more about this particular case. Why is this important? Because people opting into different things that they can do. Like, for example, helping each other out. Like, for example, giving each other, food in this particular case. And note, this has practical, tangible benefits to people. Because collectively we can do more. We can build more houses. We can start with more businesses. We're likely to do. And in many of these cases, these problems that exist in communities are because people don't even talk about these sort of things to begin with. So if you're able to connect people to do this, it's good. But you know what also is good? The fact that people engage in this sort of thing, even if its point is building a house in this sort of thing, it's still good for people. People feel nice when they do this sort of thing. When they're able to be rewarded by community to their community, or at least they're indoctrinated into believing this particular case, then that means they have better time on our side of the house. Yeah.
So the problem with this case is there's some magical penalty that apparently doesn't stop people from opting out, but is strong enough to force you to do all these different things.
Yes. Literally, yes. Third argument, political impacts in this particular case. Note, it's hard for you to engage in politics because it's something that you may not necessarily care about. Like, for example, you could say, it's not my problem. You could be, for example, lazy in this particular case. You could not, for example, say it's not that important because they don't have anything to do us. This changes on our side of us because necessarily voting, political activism, all these types of things are necessarily connected to your inner group in this sort of case because it's necessarily connected to benefits that engage for you, benefits that engage for you. So, when we say mechanisms that I explained, in fact, this means that people have a higher likelihood to go out and vote, a higher likelihood to join political movements and social movements for specific problems that they have in this particular case. And because politicians see this sort of thing, they're likely to co-opt these types of mechanisms, they're likely to co-opt this in their narrative, talking about that they're part of the community, talking about this particular case. This means that you create whole how do you say, groups of people or voting groups that exist that are important in democratic process, both in terms of local elections, like for example your local mayor being elected, but also in terms of national elections in this particular case. Meaning that communities, how do you say, if they're able to get a push from, for example, them receiving 10% vote to 15% vote or 1% vote in this particular case, their bargaining power increases, the likelihood of good policies coming to them or general political adaptability of people not being blocked also increases in this particular case. The bottom line is very simple. Maybe, to a certain extent, some people will be coerced, but collectively together, us being able to build all of these good things, us being able to do all of these good things, means that the curve is bigger on our side of the house. For all these reasons, to pause.
I thank the Prime Minister. I now invite the Leader of the Opposition to address the House.
Hi, can I be heard? I'm realizing that I can't see a thumbs up.
Yeah, you're good.
So I'll also do some shout-outs. Shout out to all of the Philippines and all of Asia. Your support means still with me. Shout out to my teammates, my contingent mates in Ateneo, and to Toby for tolerating me throughout this entire run. Finally, I'd like to shout out my girlfriend who knitted a scarf because she knew that he cold in Madrid and I hate the cold. So even to this stage, I carry her with me. She's the scarf is on the table right next. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. It's the third time. I am so glad I'm not OG. The first thing I'm going to do is outline a defense of status quo. We still have communities. You still see yourself as an individual related to that community, but the primary source of your identity is your ability to dictate yourself, and your primary obligations are to yourself. This doesn't mean that you never affiliate with your community, but simply it is the way that the community tries to get you to affiliate with them in the first place changes. Namely, the obligation should not be from you to the community, but that the community should convince you to stay within that community. This stems from 3 competitive reasons. The first is simply put, there's competition between communities, which means there's a strong incentive for trying to provide better and better services, or alternatively better and better narratives for you to opt into. But secondly, there's also fear of dilution and general weakness, which means you have to create positive incentives for you to help others and create a strong community. Thirdly, and obviously, is that there's an option to disaffiliate and not go to any community at all because community is simply not good enough for you. The problem with opening government's flippant response to my POI is that these penalties, these obligations, manifest badly. They always have and they always will. Theoretically, you can opt out, but it is never a realistic choice for 3 structural reasons. 1, because everybody believes in it and therefore no one questions it. It is almost impossible to come up with the confidence to speak up in status quo. Beyond that, it's impossible or difficult to have visible and visible examples of other people trying to speak out in the first place, and it's difficult to leave, to move to other places and to mobilize enough support to give yourself a job, to give yourself a community. If community is so important in government, you could never feasibly leave. But secondly, it's worst of all, is that once they are, feel the need to instrumentalize you, right? You feel like you're strung along, right? So it's constitutive of your identity, which means it's hard for you to criticize it internally because you feel it so deeply connected to yourself, and it's hard for you to criticize it to others because they feel like it's attacking themselves. So realistically speaking, criticism is not an alternative on government bench. But thirdly and finally, is that it never occurs to you that the obligation is the problem in the first place, and this blame is displaced onto other groups of people, other problems in your life, despite the fact that it has and always will be your community. Status quo is a far better side than this alternative. We move to the first argument. People live better, happier, and more fulfilled lives. All people believe they have an obligation to the community on government, but they do not necessarily fit in. We believe that over time, these communities become less and less good for you, less and less fulfilling, and make you less and less happy. First, communities tend to be imposed arbitrarily on you upon birth. Another criticism to their point of opting out is simply that they never explain how you could opt out. You might say in your head that you could opt out, but if you're that LGBT person in opening government example and you try to opt out of a sex community, of a homophobic community, how do you stop heteronormative standards being fed down to you, being forced down your throat? How do you stop your parents at dinner table saying terrible things to you over and over again? This simply isn't a realistic alternative when you don't have competitive incentives to, one, improve that community over time, such as the harms never manifest in the first place. But beyond that, these communities are structurally likely to displace you because, one, there are just millions of ways that will not suit you or your village just by accident. And beyond that, over time, the mechanism of social change, these communities were built and optimized for the past. But as social change and time goes on, you are simply not the person this community is built for. They are built on traditionalist, conservative beliefs that simply do not fit the worldview of today. But secondly, and worst of all, is that values and beliefs within communities become more malleable on opposition bench. The first thing is that simply put, more people question many of these things and can criticize whether or not they're good. So maybe in opening government, there are some obligations that they are good, and we can agree. But there are some obligations that are bad. Some of them are a waste of time. Some of them lead to corruption. Some of them are insufficiently accountable. And we observe that when more people question them, you are much able to improve and drastically change these structures, as the actual pooling of resources is itself good. I'd like to note that this impact has two immediate outcomes. The first outcome is that the actual services themselves get better, such that pooling is not done towards harming people, but actually good in the first place. So government never proves that these resources are used for something good. But secondly, and more importantly, is that if they are bad, ineffective, people never opt into these services in the first place, and you get a community that works for no one and for nothing. The second impact is that simply put, people are more receptive to criticism. The upper space of the initial mechanism applied in the initial part of the speech, which is that when you don't feel like it's the only part of your identity or the main and critical part of your identity, you are more receptive to change within this community because you don't feel like it's an assault on your identity and you don't feel like stagnancy is necessary for stability and safety. Which means that you are substantially more likely to allow for change, whether you're a person in power or a person with the capacity to vote, with the capacity to change rules in the household, so on and so forth. But thirdly and finally is that communities themselves have a larger felt obligation to help people for the structural reasons we provided earlier in the intro. What are the impacts of these points independent of their destruction of government space? The first is that simply put, these classes, these cultures, and so on are preconditions for many of the material needs you have to survive, in order to have food, water, and so on, to have a sense of belonging. And so when these things are from the beginning terrible, or they grow worse over time because they grow less and less suited to your life, or worse of all, you are unable to go to the one that actually is best for you, you live a much, much worse life, and is a precondition for any possible benefit that might arise from debate. But secondly, and worst of all, is that this worsens communities over time. If government is right that some communities are good and some are bad, more of the worst ones tend to arise, and less of the good ones tend to stay in place and stay in power. Thirdly and finally, is that simply people are less happy. They have less time to explore their own preferences. They have less time to explore their individual ways, the obligations they might be to themselves, for the basic reason that they feel that this is mostly subsumed by the community, and hence they are less and less happy. Nobody can do that in the first place. So maybe they might need some basic conditions for happiness, but they never have the sufficient conditions to know themselves and be happy in the first place. Closing.
So, how would you define your community, and do you think you only have one today?
Probably when you have the capacity to question that community, you can have people come together to decide what that community needs in the first place. With a discussion about what the obligations are in the first place, that's when you actually get the benefits. The way up of this argument is quite simple. It's important, one, because this is just a definition of access, right? If it's gated by racism, if it's gated by terrible notions within that community, even if you can pool resources, if it never gets to you, or it doesn't get to you because you don't feel like you have the opportunity to access it, or worst of all, because they don't feel like it should be given to you, then there's no guarantee that this pooling of resources has the right distribution. But secondly, and more importantly, is that this flips their main benefit. If community identity is good, it gets better. If community identity is bad, then opening opposition fix it. The second argument quickly is that this makes conflict worse and more difficult. Some of the worst conflicts in the human race are spurred on by these communities and the willingness to instrumentalize and dehumanize individuals. The problem is that, one, you drastically increase your capacity to mobilize resources, both on a human basis as well as the capacity for people to allow certain things like funding for arms and so on, as well as the capacity to dehumanize others for the basic reason that they feel like it is their forced obligation to, but beyond that, secondly, that these resources become zero-sum between communities. It's much harder for you to see an intersectional link between communities. I lost my time, by the way. It's much harder for you to see the differences or the similarities between these communities because you are so focused on this one community subsuming your entire life. So maybe they spend more and more time in that one community, but the problem is that many communities get weaker and weaker over time as they are trodden on by the larger ones that cause hate crimes, that cause destruction, that cause war. Maybe open government is right that some communities are good, but they never allow them to be. That's why we oppose.
thank the leader of the opposition. I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to have the floor.
No thank yous. You know who you are. I love you. I don't have a girlfriend, but it doesn't matter. Also, because of all the thank yous, I would like to say one fuck you. Fuck you to Sofia University for never supporting us all these years. We received zero funding from this institution. We did not acknowledge it as us. Sofia is the city of Sofia, Bulgaria. Has nothing to do with our institutionalization. Just like to put out there. None of you really care about Bulgarians. And that's okay. It's okay because you see, you have your own communities, you have your own things to care about in your particular life. The problem is that if me and Roman also didn't care about Bulgarian debating, well, we wouldn't be maybe that worse. It would be significantly worse to the extent in which we're in the unique position to do some good for these particular perspectives. You see, life is a lottery of birth. You don't get where you're chosen to be born. So when the individuals who have the most capacity and the privilege to actually enact some change in these communities make the wrong choice not to be obliged to those particular cases, they remove the only chance for these communities to thrive in the first place. This is what we stand for in opening government. A couple of things in this. I think a lot of the frame of Ruben explains to why on the counterbalance we do not have the tipping point for active particular change. So you might still do some things for your grandma, but you're unlikely to take the bigger chances and bigger risks. So this means like you taking that corporate job in the big city versus you establishing an NGO or a business in your particular small communities. You not choosing to go under the pressures of actually engaging in politics when you can just stay in your house and make money and donate some money to your community in this particular case. This particular narrative is the tipping point for these things. We also believe you're going to do it in a smart way, meaning that you are part of this community, but you're also part, and this is direct responses now to opening opposition. You're still like an actual human being. You still engage in globalism, you still have access to internet, you still have access to knowledge and all these things, but you also have the ability to recognize particular wrongdoings and problematic things that your community is particularly doing, which means that you're in the unique position to call these particular things out. We want individuals, especially in privileged positions, to continue calling out these particular things in order for them to enact actual change inside the community. And if they make the choice not to do it, nobody else will be able to. Which means all the other people who are not in that privileged position, being the LGBT person in that religious community, being the person who is in poverty and cannot escape to the big city and things like that, there's nobody else to help these people. So gradually things are going to get worse for them, and gradually we will have no active change on our side of the house. I think you have to help them. And on a principle level, we believe that you have that particular obligation exactly because you're in your unique position. You are probably in many of these cases one of the few that speaks their language, one of the few that understands the particular context in historical sense, in political sense, in any other sense that require things to do. Maybe some of the cases you gain particular privilege because you are smarter than many of the other individuals in this particular place. You are the only one because of lottery of birth and because the inherent nature of society to make sure that you do something for these people and can be incredibly proud to support this. More responses. And then look, in the most extreme cases, we don't see this obligation as going as far to, actually having to die for your country and things like that. And I also would say, we don't even say that this obligation goes as far as you have to pay taxes to this community, things like that, because we all know taxation is fair. What's more important to understand is that you still have the capacity to choose how you engage with this particular narrative based on your particular degree and consequences, but the main goal is that you do something. You do something that you believe you can help these communities, and you do think about this, and you go to the kid, and you make the hard choices in the particular cases. You still care about you. You're still not going to put yourself in the worst position ever, but this is why you're going to engage in this narrative in a productive way in many of the particular cases. Look, so in happiness, I think happiness in general is for our side of the house. First of all, you can uniquely achieve happiness on our side of the house through this narrative, which is given to you, because you believe that you derive your happiness from the fact that you're helping your community. Why is this even better on ourselves? It's essentially flipping, nowadays the mechanism is we like flipping. I don't know. The thing is, we like happiness on our side of the house because you have a direct access to a particular meaning of your life. On their side of the house, we don't know. Is it because you're religious? Is it because you're something like that? Things like that. It's far more important to derive as happiness from helping other people, and it makes you make the hard choices in the first place, which is extremely important. I think finally on conflict, I think incentives to create conflict are symmetrical. Things such as like states doing propaganda, nationalism and things like that are probably going to happen on both sides of the house. I think to the extent in which you care about your community, at least on our side of the house, the building process is much bigger because you don't escape this country, which is basically ravaged, which has no alternatives, and you don't leave the people behind that are being there that have no other options, especially if you are not a privileged person. Before I continue opening. No, you're pick and choosing particular situations in particular communities. We talk about much more situations on our particular side of the house. Many people are not LGBT, and they gave the LGBT responses in this particular case. You don't have to defend you dying for this particular situation. I explained to you why you have the particular obligation. I think finally in this round, what matters the most is that we increase the capacity for these communities to do better, and we uniquely do it only for us. It means that when that person decides to go back in some other way, especially like the cook, individuals are different. Some are very, very Buddhistical, others are not so Buddhistical. On this spectrum, we influence them throughout the whole, especially those from privileged backgrounds, because those from privileged backgrounds are unlikely to see the full picture in certain of these scenarios and are likely to feel the pain. Now, when they are actively part of their community and they feel it as an obligation, they learn more, they are more activated, and it trickles down for all of your society in terms of your ability to basically bridge the empathy gap to other communities and understand that other people need help in these particular situations. For the one last fucking time, I'm so happy to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the floor. proposition, community is a shackle that alienates you from your very sense of self, discourages you from discovering your own preferences, and emboldens the worst forms of tyranny. The first thing I want to do is explain why individuals feel deeply alienated and unhappy in their world. Because the extent of their material is to say that you can derive happiness from helping your community. Problem, they never explain why people have the capacity to help their community. And I would suggest in any given society, very few people will have the resources to give back to their parents, especially those in the most vulnerable and marginalized situations where they need, as a precondition to be able to help, to prioritize themselves to their extent. And this is where we flip the material. The vast majority of people fail their obligations far more often than they're able to meet them, even in the smallest ways. Most people become busy with their job, can't call their grandma, can't call their parents, can't vote in an election because there are other things that preoccupy them by matter of necessity. The difference is that on that side of the house, the unhappiness and intense feeling of failure you feel as a result of everyone saying that you have this obligation intensifies. And this is where their case falls apart, right? Because they can't assume there is a magic pill that leads you to believe in social conditioning. The mechanisms of social conditioning remain largely the same. This is things like legal punishments. It's in their world where communities become more harsh, become more dogmatic, and become more willing to impose strict punishments on people who fail to meet their obligations. So when they talk about the elderly who cannot contribute, who cannot work a job, these are the people that society comes to resent on their side. These are the people who are more unhappy. Look at how marginal the entirety of proposition's case is, secondly, to all of the material we give you from David as to why alienation results. First, you aren't given the time and capacity to find your preferences. Yes, you believe you have an obligation to your community. That doesn't mean your preferences are automatically aligned with what the community says your preferences should be. Individuals will still want to find and want to pursue their passions. The problem is in your world, they're constantly discouraged and are never given the avenues to explore their passions. You aren't given the things like access to education, given the things like access to extracurriculars, because in their world these are seen as distractions rather than useful things that individuals ought to pursue. Second, because even when you find your passions, you're constantly forced to make sacrifices, constantly never tolerated and never given the option to voice out your own preferences. But third, because even if you are able to engage in your passions to some extent, you feel constantly burdened because you feel like the opportunity cost of not helping your community is always what you're sacrificing. Take the example of an Asian child who thinks constantly that he has to help his family, he has to help his parents. Even when he does find genuine joy in playing video games, every waking moment of that means of happiness is plagued by the thought that he isn't doing enough for his community, that he's failing his obligation. And this is where the analysis from David is crucial, because we explain why the expectations of communities get worse in this world, why the obligations become harder and harder to meet as a result of people not being able to opt out and communities having no competition mechanism that facilitates them. Even if you get better collective action problems, people are just unhappier, and that is worse. Secondly, let's engage with OG and explain why this narrative makes communities themselves worse. Because the entirety of OG's substantive case is that communitarianism motivates people to engage in collective action, fulfill their social obligations, and do things like vote elections. The problem with this is at no point do they explain why these are all exclusive. The first thing I'd point out is that self-interest can motivate each of these impacts as well. It is possible, in fact, to align self-interest and come to collective solutions. You want to vote for outcomes that benefit you. You love your parents as an individual, which is why you vote for them. You recognize gains for the society and economy writ large still raise your own quality of life, which is why you work towards them. And here's the kicker. It's in their world where individuals are less likely to consider what outcome is best for society, because they don't view themselves as having that role or that responsibility. They believe that the community is the only actor that can dictate what's best, which is why they never seek to imagine these in the first place. You are bound to what leaders tell you is the best outcome, which is why on net you actually get worse outcomes from them. But secondly, I point out, for many of their own impacts to work, you need a level of individuality. You need to have the motivation to climb the social ladder before you can give back to your parents. You need to have the economic capacity to do things like that. Insofar as individuals are less likely to take that step, less likely to move away, less likely to pursue a job in a different city because they feel like they are failing that obligation, you don't get any of the benefits you yourself clamor for. But thirdly, I point out, here's where we flip it. I point out that solutions to collective action problems are both more likely to be sought out by the people and better done when communities actually feel like they need to benefit the individuals in question. Because government assumes that the mechanisms by which communities decide what outcomes they work towards remain the same. But that can't be the case, because
many of the mechanisms we rely on in the status quo, like the vote, are premised on the recognition that individuals are superior to the community. The fact that they're premised on the idea that the communities don't know everything. Accountability requires a level of independent thought and requires a meaningful opt-out, which is why they cannot get their impact. I'll take closing if you have one.
Do you view debate as your community as well as the community you were born into?
Okay, so this is where I want to flip the point of intersectionality. Communities become less tolerant of people having more than one community in opposition for 3 reasons. First, because every obligation and your ability to feel every obligation is seen as zero-sum. You are either filling your obligation through the debate community or you are filling it through your nationality in the instances where these compete. Second, because individuals themselves are less exposed and less likely to seek out other communities in the first place. Why would my parents, in a world where they think my only role is to be a servant to my community, allow me to engage in debating, allow me to spend the holidays in Madrid rather than spend time with them? I'm sorry, Dad. But thirdly, they're more forced to make trade-offs to the most immediate community because that is the one with the most power. I want to note here, communities themselves thriving is not an outcome that can win opposition in the debate insofar as they don't explain why those communities are good. We explain why our net communities get far, far worse, which is why our material and our responses put us ahead. Thirdly, let's talk about conflict, because this argument is independently debate-winning and heard absolutely minimal response, which is just to say that nations have an incentive to propagate conflict and nationalism on either side. Clearly, the difference is a few things. First, it manifests in how willing people are to disengage from that conflict and disengage from the terrible things the states are willing to do to them. It manifests in how willing you are to question, how willing you are to form counter-identities and counter-communities. Say like you are revolutionary, secede from your state, declare yourself as an independent actor, rather than continue to be forced to exist in the community you were born into. But second, it manifests in how willing you are to dehumanize other people, when you see them as fundamentally different from you, because you don't consider yourself an individual, you consider yourself a part of your community. That is when you are far worse, that is where you are most alienated. For those reasons, opposed.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I invite the Member of the Government to address the House.
Can you hear me well? Is this echoing?
Yeah.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. There's a problem on top half so far. OG, good guys, want to talk about good communities getting better. OO want to talk about some bad communities getting worse and alienating people, and explain why communities will say something that would lead to less need to serve individuals. In our extension, we're going to show how people in the counterfactual world are likely to perceive community and what communities they are likely to identify with, meaning we will settle the question on which is more impactful. We will show why communities still have an interest to compete for you and why people are likely to give back to all of us rather than just an individual ethnic community that they might share. One piece of extension rebuttal, then the extension. I want to point out something from the manual because I feel like OO should have read it. In this house prefers the world motions, there is no retro causality. The motion gives us fiat to assume that people just believe that they have an obligation to their community. This is why the retro causality, which they can't argue anyway about the community would have to enforce it and push the narrative forcibly on you, even if you don't agree with it, is something that we just can't claim per the debate. Secondly, I also want to remind that a word in the motion is all individuals, which extends to politicians and leaders that decide policies in the first place. We think by all this logic, it's likely that communities in any case are incentivized, or even if not incentivized, believe that they should aid their own people. Cool. Let's chat about what actually changes in the debate. Quick characterization. OO consists in leader opposition that on both sides of the debate, people have community affiliation in addition to their self-interest. They use it to mitigate OG by saying you still have caring for your community, and they're obviously correct. Note, however, that without characterizing which are the incidents in which today we don't prioritize our communities, this also mitigates their own impact in the debate quite symmetrically, because it means that all the communitarian prioritization of my own people, etc., is quite symmetric. What are the instances in which we think today people prioritize themselves over their community? A, when they think that the personal benefit to them is larger than the one they would get from the community. So today people also have a self-interested reason to care about the community because the community serves them. But when instances where they think that they could get more than what they would get from the community directly, say if I can make a crime and get away with it, are instances in which I am tempted to prioritize myself. Two crucial reasons why it is solved under our side. A, because self-identity that is grounded in community means that hurting the community is equivalent to hurting myself. If I base my identity on my community as well, it also means that I'm less likely to hurt it. But secondly, it means that there's no need to get caught. Note, throughout most of history, we had issue of actually enforcing laws. Half of all murderers never see the day in prison, not to mention crimes which are much harder to prove, such as rape. Simply because it's really hard to deter people, it's really hard to catch them in the incidents, and people have optimism bias to believe that they won't get caught. Under our side, they don't need to get caught. Their own guilt, their own conscience will always haunt them. Thirdly, when people don't know or rationalize to themselves that what they are doing isn't hurting their community because they can't read minds, so they assume that their actions are just going to benefit others, even when they are actively harming them, because, say, they are they are being bigoted in a sense when they don't know that a friend of them might also be in the part of the community because they're in the closet. Under our side, there's a much stronger push to actually proactively think of what are the implications of the actions you're doing on the other. Fourthly, when people think that people around them are bad and don't deserve that you actually care for them or prioritize them. We think that under our side, you know that not just you, but everyone around you also believes in that. Meaning that you know that they care for you and know that they're going to serve you in the future. This means that you are less likely to have stigmas against people in the first place and think that they are going to care for you as well, meaning that they deserve good treatment of you. Who are you likely to see as your community? We think several crucial things. A, people have multiple communities. When I came up to the stage, people shouted Tel Aviv, as much as people shouted Bulgari for Sofia. However, we also shouted for them ESL, because this is yet another wider community that they have as well. Presumably, they also have some non-debating communities, but these are obviously less important. We think that this means that people learn from a very young age to extend their community farther than just the one they are born in. Note how this already engages OO, because it means communities still need to compete for you, and that your identity isn't locked to just one community. If indeed, as OO say, I'm gay and the community doesn't accept me for it for some reason, in addition to the community I was born into, I also have the gay community, which is great. Secondly, we think that people also see in the way that it manifests that it's not just about them. Because I'm supposed to prioritize the community over myself, and as everyone in the debate concedes, this extends to the large community, not just my own family. It means that I understand that it's not about proximity, it's not about my immediate circle of closeness, it's about much wider than that. Thirdly, we also view community in this world based on what the community does for me. Note the wording in the info sign. I feel obligated to the community, meaning that it directly ties to what the community has done for me. This is what I'm more likely to feel affiliated with rather than just the color of their skin or what name they have. This is what I'm likely to see as community opening.
The big analytical gap here is that the community gets to define what community harm and obligation is in the first place.
Okay, thank you, gotcha. Here's the thing. Literally everything I said is likely to be implemented by the community itself. The community teaches me to prioritize the community
not just myself and my own family. So I infer from this circles of proximity that are not the most proximate to it. The fact that I learned that the reason I should care is because of obligation. Okay, moving on then, what are the impacts of this? Firstly, we think it means that in this world, people have significantly less stigma and racism. Note, OO says, on both sides there is communitarianism. The difference is, when today I associate with my nationality or with my race, I am less likely to apply to things that are relevant to my obligations to them, and more likely to associate with things that are about my direct identity, meaning that it's less likely to be about wider circles. Secondly, we also prove that people who do less bad things, less crime in the first place, proving less active harm, not just more donations. Thirdly, it also means that people would treat each other better personally because they extend the community to each individual around them, which doesn't have to go through specific societal systems that you to promote.
I thank the government member. I invite the member of the opposition to address the House.
And thanks, Princeton. And thanks, Axted. Thank you, everyone. Cool. I think the truth of this round is that opening opposition has been highly worst case, and opening government and closing government have been highly best case. It's probably unfair to imagine that communities are going to punish you massively for the types of things you decide to do in either world. So the contribution from closing opposition, and I know this might be a surprise at this point in the round, since no speaker wanted to take POI, is that we are going to claim, A, since we've been co-opted by the American crowd, that selfishness is good, and B, we're going to deal with the claim of, we're going to deal with the best case of opening government and closing government and explain why it's the case that these communities act even out of love in ways that restrict you and prevent you from accessing choice. We think that communities have subtle pressures which manipulate you and mean that you cannot make decisions that are in your best interest. Opening government and closing government in this round loud and praise how these communities and how many communities they're actually a part of, and yet still criticize the status quo where this is possible. I'll do a couple of things then. First, refutation, then a constructive argument about why these obligations are negative, even when they come from a good place, accepting the highest possible burden in this round, and explain why it's still awful in the world of government. I just want to respond quickly to closing government then. The first thing they say is that you can freely leave these communities, and that is a good thing. One, even if we accept this to be true, this hurts massively. It is very, very difficult to turn your back on a community. But the reason why they say that this is so easy for them to be able to turn their back on debating is that they don't feel this very, very overwhelming sense of obligation that we think this world creates. So it is possible to turn away, but in their world, it is a decision that is fundamentally traumatizing and limits you. But more than that, they say that there are infinite ways to define the community. The reality is that in the status quo, you are given the capacity to define and choose which communities you are actually a part of. Because there are competing groups, and there are groups that you can consider yourself a part of at any given point. You can decide to be a member of one or the other because they aren't seen as trade-offs, they aren't seen as mutually exclusive. So, with that out of the way, extension. Your obligation comes from a sense of collective love. Your parents aren't going to be the ones that shame you endlessly every single night. It's not going to be the case that your friends consider you evil. I don't think this is fair. Instead, let's characterize this as the average community. Places where there is a sense of love, places where people do in fact care about you, and where they want you to succeed and they want you to support you. Why is it the case that even within the confines of these communities, you are still fundamentally excluded, accessing the benefits of opening opposition, but doing so in a world that actually exists? One, there are cultural ways in which this is expressed. So it's, for example, watching movies where characters always give back to their families or always give back to their most close communities. So fundamentally speaking then, culturally, this is a restrictive choice. And even if we think that this choice serves some sort of utile instrumental benefit. We think that we should care at any level because we are not utility robots. We are people that derive satisfaction from making choices that benefit ourselves and are things that actually realize our own interests. So to the extent that this is manipulated in their world, even socially and even subtly, this is still something that is principally regrettable. Second, I think that this creates, no thanks, a strong sense of responsibility. The reason is that it is overwhelming. You perceive it in different ways, right? Love in their world is a very different thing. Whereas now I believe my family, in our side, is a group that loves me unconditionally. In their world, that is fundamentally tied to the sexist condition. I doubt whether or not that love is something that is real. I feel like I need to give back because maybe that love runs out when I don't. So to that extent, even if they're not telling me that, to the extent that this narrative is fundamentally permeates society, it is something that still overrides my decision-making. Third, I think it's just the types of decision-making patterns you become accustomed to. So it's things like making decisions that benefit your siblings at your expense. These are very, very small things, but they are things that condition you to prioritize others at your own expense. But fourthly and finally, I think that alternatives and doing other things is just consistently portrayed by the media as and other groups around you as just being something that is selfish, is something that is counter to the interests of your group. It's not acting as a good human. So then, if it's the case that you act selfish in our world, why is selfishness something that we actually think is just acceptable and is actually preferable? One, I think that having autonomy to redefine your communities and the communities you are part of is something that is uniquely accessible on our side. So you can decide which communities benefit you and which ones are holding you back, which is what OG and CG seem so hell-bent on accessing. And this is really, really good for social mobility, because you can decide that a community is actually restricting you. You can decide that your conservative parents are actually holding you back, and therefore you can move to any given community, and you don't feel the sense of backlash and internalized guilt that their side imposes. Second, even if this isn't true, people can still specialize, and specialization is something that just makes people more effective. You can define communities that you are most beneficial in. You can define yourself in relation to your professional career, for example, or in terms of your romantic life. These are things that allow people to do what they are best at, and these are the areas that you derive the greatest sense of satisfaction from because they are fundamentally rewarding you on a constant level. Third, it is moderated at some level by opposing narratives. Before I explain this, I'll take OG.
Would you leave a drowning baby to die so you don't get to use it?
This is so random, right? Like, it's not about the drowning baby. The claim is that there are a set of reasons why suddenly you're pressured, and selfishness is something that is good, but not that this means you're going to leave the freaking drowning baby. Why are you doing this whole best case, worst case thing? Let's just deal with what happens in 99% of scenarios. How are you going to do this? It is moderated by opposing narratives. Again, being charitable, God forbid. Okay, you moderate because there are other narratives that have to exist in society. Things like people telling you that you ought to care for your family that already exist in the status quo. Things like give back to community. These are all norms that exist religiously, they exist in society at large, so that neutralizes the extent to which any given narrative can be completely permeating your sense of existence. But furthermore, I think you just grow to dislike your community because you're aware of what you lost out on, you feel like you didn't get to make decisions, you feel like you were limited in the type of life that you got here in the first place. And that trades off with giving back at the highest level. Because in their society, if it's true what CG says, that you abandon your community at some point, or that you grow to dislike them at some level, that trades off with giving back, because you feel like that community actually failed you, or you grow to resent them over time. I think leaving these communities, then, is a precondition to feeling good, because making those choices is what gives you a sense of meaning. Why is this harmful? A few sets of impacts. One, even in the communities that actually treat you nicely, you preclude access to multiple sets of identity. This activates OO's material on conflict as well. You can define yourself by your job. You can define yourself by your romantic interests. But second, I think principally this is flawed to the extent that we probably believe that our obligations extend beyond these communities as well. For example, to the world by virtue of processes like colonialism, for example. But thirdly, there is a general sense of isolation that sets in their world. It's that you just end up spending more time with your family and these groups that are close to you at the expense of a lot of others. So even in the best case, even when you're loved, even when your community seeks to care of you, these subtle pressures restrict you in ways that are awful, and so the best case for God is awful, you propose. Okay.
I thank a member of opposition. To whip the case for the government, I invite the government to take the floor.
Hey, really excited to keep it short. Thanks to the debate community as a whole, the Israeli debate community specifically, wouldn't be here without you, and wouldn't be here without you, and that's it. Time. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. I'm going to talk about the quality of life of individuals, and I'm going to talk about conflict and behavior towards other communities. But before that, a few answers to closing opposition. I think that what closing opposition misses, and opening opposition misses as a whole, is that when people view themselves as part of a community and an identity and obligation towards that community, it's not just the individual that has an obligation towards the community. It is the community and other individuals from within that community that feel an obligation and identify with other individuals within that community as well. That means that all of their analysis on the likely reaction of this community to my desire for change and how it's likely to keep me within the community is false. Because if other individuals in the community see my pain, if they identify with it, if they feel like my pain and my incontentment is their not bad feelings, then they're less likely to force that upon me and be more open to adapting in order to make me accepted. This means that closing opposition's framing on the fact that it is more traumatizing to leave the community on my side, I think is actually false at the end of the day. Because when Hagar gives you analysis on how communities view themselves and the circles of communities and how people relate to each other, this proves that on our side, because the rest of the community feels like it is obligated to you as well, that is when they're more likely to adapt and more likely to accept you branching out and doing all of those things. But moreover, we think today communities act that way because of the selfishness of individuals and because of the knowledge that other individuals will prioritize themselves over the community, so leaving the community is likely to harm them. By explaining to you the exact situations in which today people prioritize themselves over the community, and that's exactly what we're avoiding on the other side, that is where she shows you that communities are likely to react differently. Even if Oji said similar words, our explanation of the impact and how this impacts how communities relate to the individuals within the community is unique to our side and significantly more engaging with the claims coming out of opposition than our opening government. But second, just in case what closing opposition we're trying to do or run on a principle where you're allowed to be selfish, when I don't think they prove that an additional analysis would be too late, here's what I think is not true. We think that there is a balance. You're allowed to prioritize yourself as long as the harm you're causing to other people doesn't overweigh that. I think what Hagar shows you by showing you where people prioritize themselves today and why that's likely to change shows that that's exactly where the balance sits. Because people prioritize themselves in cases like crime, in cases like corruption, in cases where you are prioritizing yourself significantly to that extent, and that's why it goes over the balance. That's why I think closing opposition are now out of this debate. Let's talk about the quality of life of individuals. What do opening government want? Opening government wants people to push more to do for their community, things like getting material needs and having a sense of meaning from helping the community. What do they don't do or get attacked on? Opening opposition tells you that today, individuals who want to help their community in order to help themselves also have an incentive to do many of these things. So I have an incentive just selfishly to build schools and to donate and to do all of those things. What is Hagar's unique contribution to this question and why it's important? We don't show you the additional benefits that people might have by getting one more school or something like that. We show you that today, the specific places where people prioritize themselves over the community are places which cause active harm to other people. These are places where people commit crimes against other people within the community in order to profit from themselves. This is where the trade-off between individualism and the trade-off between community happens. When the actions that you're taking aren't actions that benefit yourself and the community, but rather actions that only benefit yourself. This means that we're showing on our side we get significantly less of this active harm. Why do we think that less of this active harm is the important thing? It's because we think that less of this active harm is what leads to more people within the community having access to the good things that people have an incentive to do anyways today. Even if people have an incentive to build schools today, when I'm only prioritizing myself at the expense of other people, not everyone has access to it. Or if I know that people are going to commit crimes instead of going to class, or just ruin the building that I'm donating, I'm less likely to do it in the first place. That means we show you both an expansion of the impacts that opening governments say themselves, because
People aren't only doing things to benefit themselves, but for the rest of the community, but also show you why it's logically higher, because if people know that other people within their community are going to harm them, if other people in the community are going to take away or mitigate or minimize the benefits that I am sacrificing for, I am less likely to do them in the first place. Where does this put us in relation to opening opposition? Opening opposition says that communities are bad and arbitrary and will get worse because they're not accepting of change. What do we show you? We show you by their explanation of the counterfactual of being more tolerant is symmetric, because there is still competition, that's what Hadar showed you, but also their claim on the narrative of play is actually less likely because of what I told you about the sense of obligation and identity going both ways. That means that both the competitive incentive means that I don't want to be punitive. I don't want to make people feel bad within my community. I want to make them feel good within my community so that they don't go to another one. That is their mechanism and it's symmetric and exists on both sides. But also the fact that the other individuals within the community also feel bad when I give punitive punishments towards others. They also feel bad when I make other people feel bad about having feelings, because I also know that there is something that happens to me that is when other individuals are less likely to do that, flipping their case and making it more likely on our side. Before I continue, I'll take closing.
Religion tells you should give back. Society normalizes policies like welfare. Why doesn't this solve for the very worst excesses of selfishness instead of impacting?
There are some communities today which also say that you should give back to your community. We agree with that. What we're saying is that the specific cases in which the individual prioritizes themselves happen significantly less on our side, leading to significantly more positive outcomes. That means that you have actually more choice and communities get more acceptance. And in addition, people have more access to the needs that they need within their community, meaning that they're less likely to want to opt out in the first place because their community is tolerant towards that. What is the impact on conflict and behavior towards other communities? We need to let OT don't touch on this at all. But opening opposition push and say, when communities prioritize themselves over others, that's exactly when you become racist and conflicts break out. But we think that they don't engage with the fact that the origin for conflict isn't just I care more about my community. It's when I actively have to fight for resources over other communities and can't share, that's when I have an incentive to tell other communities that they're bad and can't have access. When we show you that more people have access, that communities get better overall, that we have less harm, we both show you that there's less stigma towards other communities, less legitimizing the actions against them, but also less fighting for resources that would cause the outbreak of that conflict in the first place. For those reasons, please propose.
I thank the government whip to close the debate. I invite the opposition whip to address the House.
Really quickly, some pleasantries. Thank you so much to PDP. You guys bring me so much joy. Then, thank you to North America and American debaters. I haven't met some of you, but I'm really, really honored by the support that you've given us so far. Thank you for the friends I have in the debate committee, especially those who have supported me during the slightly unpleasant month or 2 months before WUDC. Fourth, shout out to my Team Vietnam kids, and also to Jita, Greg, Heywan, Sam. And finally, thank you, Asia. You are the circuit that raised me, and I am very, very grateful. Our extension is very simple. People know themselves the best, and they're the ones who must live themselves into the future. You only have one life, and you should make the most out of it. And people are better at making themselves happy than at guessing the preferences of other people and trying to make them happy indirectly. Even in the best case scenario, people's desires and personalities do not disappear under the weight of community. Over time, resentment builds and simmers and starves support that they want to provide. What does the response we get from closing government?
that, well, actually, we don't really want to restrict individuality to that extent. We only want to prevent you from causing harm. One, that is not what you said in extension, given everything you told us about the obligation to subtly impose, for example, through culture, through conditional love, through the reasons that media changes and condemns you for making selfish choices, even if they don't cause harm. But second of all, crucially, notice that their metric for harm is based on a general definition of humanity. It's based on the idea that regardless of who experiences it, the human suffering is bad. However, it becomes justified to commit these immoral acts when you perceive some human beings as more important than others. Obviously, there are still going to be some of these harmful acts on our side. However, it's going to be significantly less than on theirs, where you're willing to commit harm for your community. Why does this speak OO? The reason for this is because Ubuntu is about love. Sure, sometimes you are trapped, you are coerced, you have nowhere else to go. But more often, you love your family and those around you, and they love you, and they want the best for you. They're the people who raised you. All the soft, fluffy, hormonal feelings you have towards the debate community or whatever still exist. The problem, though, is that that with their case then is that the subset of communities that they talk about, by their own survival mechanism, that those that suffer and have difficulty retaining people grow smaller and die over time, then become less and less prevalent, and Isaac's case is the one that makes up the vast majority of instances. Before I go any further, OG.
Even if we can see all of your jobs, we achieve better conditions for the most vulnerable by influencing those with the biggest capacity to make the biggest change in these communities, even if the rich one doesn't get that.
Do not fear, I remember your case. I will get onto it later. Okay, so then, why do we beat OG? They give us two contributions. The first of which they pluralized 2 times, and it's how they're trying to outthink OO and take the one. They tell us that there's a plurality of communities, and you can opt into them. First panel, note how defensive this is, because at best, it just mitigates the harms of community. But second of all, it's also just not true. And I think Isaac gives you the reasons why there is a trade-off much more clarity than OO does. But second of all, they tell us that people behave better. 2 responses to this. The first thing is, if this is true, then it's also the case that their claims on people, it's also extremely limited, because their first claim on community being flexible and you can opt in and out means that if a community tries to change your behavior to a large extent, so for example, someone is predisposed to not having empathy for others and committing harm, then that person simply leaves that community. So it mitigates their solvency to a large extent. But second of all, in their best case scenario that this benefit does accrue, it actually comes at a cost that we're not willing to solve. Because they tell us that the deterrence is insufficient, that it's not enough for social rules to look at us and go, well, actually, this is bad, it's unacceptable, like these harms you should not commit. They tell us that you need to think constantly about what your community wants and perceive yourself as a subset of that greater whole. That takes away your autonomy and your agency as a human being, because you cannot think about what you want, what's best for you, and you constantly must second guess and check your preferences. This is a violation of basic human rights, and we reject this. Let's do some basic weighing here. At best, their mechanism for change kicks in a small subset of cases. It's unclear what the margin is relative to the other constraints that exist on harmful actions. On the other hand, the restrictions they impose on human beings exist in every single case on scale we outweigh. Finally then, on OG, their major claim is that, well, it's better for you to support other people and that makes people better. So the first way we should beat them is we're going to compare supporting other people with being able to support yourself and make yourself as good as possible. 3 reasons why individualism is better. The first thing is, I want to flip the structural reasons that women gave up top for why individualism and the incentives for that already exist. In the exact same way, there are corresponding sense of community already. You feel a desire to help others because the evolutionary desires that humans are social animals, etc., etc. I don't need to explain this, it's very simple. The fundamental premise then is that family will help you on either side of the house. That is to say, that the most basic and fundamental conditions that they're trying to win on are out of this debate. This is not far more marginal content. But the second thing is, even within your own community, this is a really bad way of helping each other. Very simply because it's a fundamentally regressive mechanism, right? Because communities are also spread out over demographics and over, socioeconomic groups. Those who are up top have a greater ability to enhance one another's wealth and make themselves better off, whereas those at the bottom have less an ability to do so just because there are far greater constraints on time, on energy, on emotional labor, and so on and so forth. That means that they exacerbate inequality. On the other hand, so this is kind of strange, but I will shout out to the EA bros and say there are also strong trends in the status quo that mean that people give to each other, and they give in ways that are far more reflective of the inequalities that exist in society. The drowning child POI that Fuji gives us is perfect because it's based on your obligations as an individual, and that this is fundamentally morally right, as opposed to your obligations to any community because they have helped you. So for those reasons, large numbers of people will give. And even if it's not large, there's enough extremely wealthy people who are giving to foundations such as, fucking the Malaria Foundation, Greg knows things better than I do, that to make things better. But the final response I have is that communities also sometimes make sacrifices. It is also harmful for communities to make sacrifices sometimes and to hurt each other just because the benefits that this has is indirect and impulsive at best. Basically, communities don't know what you want. For example, your parents might believe that the best way to support you is to give money to you to help you go to medical school, even at the cost of your own happiness. However, you don't want to go to medical school, so the fruits of that labor are extremely small. However, it also imposes upon you obligations, feelings of regret, and I think that because they have given to you, I must go to medical school. Obviously, yes, again, this happens to some extent already on ours to the house. However, it gets significantly worse on theirs because obligations extend beyond just your immediate family, but your community, those around you, your school, whatever, all of these different factors. For those reasons, we are more plausible than OO, and we beat OG on impact and through direct responses. We're happy to close.
Okay, hey everyone, we would like you to stay in your seats for the next 2 minutes, that no one will move because we want to give judges first the opportunity to go to the deliberation room, so if we can ask for your patience for the next 2 minutes, it will be preferable. Additionally, big apologies for the people who are watching the final standing in front of me. We really apologize for the issues with the chairs. We will fix this for the closing ceremony, so everyone will be seated. Thank you very much, everyone, and please do not move until we tell you that you can. Thank you.
Okay, so final announcement. This is how it goes. So now the people that are standing there are going to go upstairs. They are going to wait patiently here so the judges get downstairs. And also we are going to take just a 25 minutes recess, and then we are going to start the award ceremony. After that, we are going to have dinner here and then go to the farewell event that is just 4 minutes down the street. Okay, so if you don't need to leave the building, I think it's easier for everyone if you don't do so. If you just need to run to the restroom